A reading from the book of Exodus. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month shall stand at the head of the calendar, and you shall reckon it the first month of the year. Tell the whole community of Israel, on the 10th of this month, every one of your families must procure for itself a lamb, one apiece for each household. If a family is too small for a whole lamb, it shall join to the nearest household in procuring one and shall share in the lamb in proportion to the number of persons who partake of it. The lamb must be a year-old male and without blemish. You may take it from either the sheep or the goats. You shall keep it until the 14th day of the month. And then, with the whole assembly of Israel present, it shall be slaughtered during the evening twilight. They shall take some of its blood and apply it to the 2 doorposts and the lintel of every house in which they partake of the lamb. At that same night they shall eat of its roasted flesh with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. And this is how you shall eat it: with your loins girded, sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it like those who are in flight. It is the Passover of the Lord. For on this night I will go through Egypt, striking down every firstborn of the land, both man and beast, and executing judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I, the Lord. But the blood will mark the house where you are, and seeing the blood, I will pass over you, and thus when I strike the land of Egypt, no destructive blow will come upon you. This day shall be a memorial feast for you, which all your generations shall celebrate with pilgrimage to the Lord as a perpetual institution." The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Blessing cup is a communion with the blood of Christ the Lord. Our blessing cup is a communion with the blood of Christ the Lord. Our blessing cup is a communion
A reading from the first letter of St. Paul to the Corinthians. Brothers and sisters, I received from the Lord what I also handed on to you, that the Lord Jesus, on the night he was handed over, took bread, and after he had given thanks, broke it and said, "This is my body that is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, also the cup after supper, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink the cup, you proclaim the death of the Lord until he comes." The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John.
Glory to you, Lord.
Before the feast of Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to pass from this world to the Father. He had loved his own in the world, and he loved them to the end. The devil had already induced Judas, son of Simon the Iscariot, to hand him over. So during the supper, fully aware that the Father had put everything into his power and that he had come from God and was returning to God, he rose from supper and took off his outer garments. He took a towel and tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and dry them with the towel around his waist. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Master, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus answered and said to him, "What I am doing, you do not understand now, but you will understand later." Peter said to him, "You will never wash my feet." Jesus answered him, "Unless I wash you, you will have no inheritance with me." Simon Peter said to him, "Master, then not only my feet, but my hands and head as well." Jesus said to him, "Whoever has bathed has no need except to have his feet washed, for he is clean all over. So you are clean, but not all." For he knew who would betray him. For this reason he said, "Not all of you are clean." So when he had washed their feet and put his garments back on and reclined at table again, he said to them, "Do you realize what I've done for you? You call me teacher and master, and rightly so, for indeed I am. If I, therefore, the master and teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash one another's feet. I have given you a model to follow, so that as I have done for you, you should also do." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. When I was a kid growing up in Concord, we had, well, I imagine many of your families probably had them, those kind of cheap little Kodak Instamatic cameras. You know, the ones that had the flash cubes on top that look like ice cubes. I love the fact that it would flash, then would like turn automatically all by itself. And you would take the pictures and take them to get them developed, and they'd come back, these like little square pictures with white borders on them, which were always very cool to see. Yeah, people are remembering that very well. And I didn't think much of those little pictures for a long time. You know, they were stored away in a shoebox somewhere. And then, as you are aware, last October, my mom passed away. And we went looking for pictures from our past. And sure enough, found shoeboxes full of those little square pictures that were kind of faded a little bit at the edges, yellowing a little bit, little ends furling, just like this one. This, for those of you who are younger, is what a Kodak Instamatic camera would take. A picture like this. I took this picture. There is my brother, there is my father, and there is half of my mom. I was still developing my photo-taking skills. Obviously, we did not use this picture for her funeral, but she's there kind of with us anyway, right? Quite the thing. We want things like this. We want memories that outlive those who've gone before us. We want something of them to hang on, to know they are still with us, to know that they are near. And that's what tonight is all about. Memory. Remembrance. Jesus, on the night before he died, gathers with his friends, his closest, and he leaves them ways to remember him. Do this in remembrance of me. Only he does something far more wonderful than give us a shoebox full of pictures. He gives us his very self. In our second reading today, from Paul's letter to the Corinthians, it is the earliest writing we have where anything about the Last Supper is recorded. Paul's letters were written even before the Gospels. And it was written around the year 56, we think, which puts it roughly within 20, 30 years of the actual event. And Paul gives us those words that have become very dear and important to the early Christian community already. Taking bread, taking wine, and ending with those magnificent words, do this in remembrance of me. That was his point. That's what he wanted people to do. To remember him. And as I've shared with so many of you on different occasions, the Jewish concept of memory, the concept that Jesus would have had in mind, and one that I think is very true if we pay attention to it, is that when you remembered someone, you did not leave them in the past, but you brought them right smack dab there into the present with you. When you remembered someone or some event, it was alive for you again. It was real for you again. You could hear them again, experience them again, touch them again, know they were there again. You had a brief little bit of that, some of you, when I talked about Kodak Instamatic cameras. You remembered them very well. You can probably see it, feel it. You know the cheap plastic sound it made when you worked with it. It was all there for you. Or I was laughing today at this picture, because in the very back of this picture, there's a painting on the wall. And what I remember of that painting is the day that my brother threw a Matchbox car at me, and it went into the painting and ruined it. My parents were not happy. My brother blamed me because I moved. But the chaos and the humor and the love and dearness of family life is very much there. And that's the power of remembering. Those words that Paul gives us about taking bread and taking wine and blessing them and sharing them and doing this in remembrance of Jesus are the beating words, the beating heart of every time we gather together in this place around this table to remember him. so that he becomes present again to us, not left in the past, but here, that we can touch him and experience him. He comes to us for real. John's gospel, as you may have noticed this evening, makes no reference to bread or to wine or to blessing or taking or breaking or giving. John went through all of that much earlier in his gospel, around chapter 6, when we had the bread of life discourses. That for John is when Jesus is teaching about how he becomes bread and wine for those in need. But rather, John in the Last Supper gives us this unique and remarkable story of Jesus seeking to be remembered in another way. See, John's gospel was written around the year 90. And by the time John's gospel was written, people were very familiar with remembering Jesus in the bread, in the wine, at the altar. And while it was for them a sacred moment, no doubt, it wasn't moving beyond their church celebrations into the rest of their lives. Remembering Jesus wasn't as close in their heart on a daily basis the way that it should have been. And so John provides another way of understanding this evening, another way of remembering Jesus that connects to and gives reason and power to the Eucharist as part of daily life. He tells the story of Jesus washing feet. And part of that is, of course, the need to be servant for one another, absolutely. But even more at root than that is what John tells us. He had loved his own in the world, and he would love them to the end. It was an act of such profound love and humility by Christ that was meant to interpret what would happen to him the next day. It's why he has that little go-around with Peter and says, if I don't wash you, if you can't accept that I'm washing your feet, you will never accept what I'm about to do for you tomorrow in washing you clean on the cross, in dying for you. It's the moment when he truly lives what he's been preaching. His upside-down values, where the greatest becomes the slave of all. God becomes our slave. Because if you're not aware, that whole foot-washing thing in Jewish culture was reserved to be the work of non-Jewish slaves. That's who did that work. That's why Peter is so awestruck by it. And, whoa, what are you doing? You're going to wash my feet? That's a slave's job. And that's what Jesus does. Such profound humility and such great love in that moment. And then he essentially says, what I have done for you, you should do for each other. It's not hard to add the words, do this in remembrance of me. Follow my example. And in those moments of great love and humility that put power to the Eucharist, you make me present. It was John's hope that that concept, that love and that humility would move out of the church with people as they would seek to serve one another. Even our first reading from Exodus today, where God himself gives a little monologue and tells the people to keep the Passover. He says, you will do it yearly as a memorial feast. Do this in remembrance of everything I've done for you. We are a people of remembrance. We are a church of remembrance. And in remembering, we make present the great mysteries and the awesome power and love and humility of our God. And it's so amazing we do it, because we all know how easy it is to forget. It's very easy to forget. I'd forgotten until the memory comes along for us again. And somehow, for more than 4,000 years, that Passover that was part of Jesus' life and the life of the world is remembered every year. Our Jewish brothers and sisters have Passover starting tomorrow. For 2,000 years, We have gathered as a church and seen bread and wine raised up in remembrance of Jesus, that he would be present with us. And for 100 generations, we as a church have also knelt to physically wash each other's feet, as Jesus instructed us to do, that we might remember love and humility that backs up the power of the Eucharist. And so we do that tonight in remembrance of him. And in our sharing bread and wine that is blessed, and in our washing of each other's feet, we believe he becomes present to us, uniquely in the Eucharist, yes, but just as much so, I think, when we serve each other, Christ is present in those very tender moments. And so tonight, we do what we as a church have always done very well. We ritually symbolize in our actions the way that we want to live. We come and we wash each other's feet, and we allow others to serve us as well. I know, feet are difficult things. I've heard love songs and love poems about people's hair, their eyes, their face, their beauty. Never one about people's feet. They're just not attractive. It's sort of sad that there are even people who absent themselves from this Mass precisely because they know their feet are involved. But there's something lovely, I think, that Christ would take that part of our body that's kind of ugly and smelly and dirty and horrible and bring such love and gentleness to it. And we do that tonight. If we struggle with it, good for us. It demonstrates that we have some grasp of what it is that Christ sought to do to the worst parts of our human being, to clean them for us, that we might live with him forever. So in just a few moments, you will all be invited to come forward essentially in the same lines that you use for communion, up these aisles, to have your feet washed and to wash the feet of someone else. If you have a problem getting shoes or socks on or off, or getting up or down, there will be monitors at every station to help you and assist you with that. We want to serve each other while we're serving each other, of course. Like I say, I know feet are ugly. We got to get over that. It's just where it's at. If we cannot here, in love and humility, wash each other's ugly feet, we will never out there do the hard work of serving those with whom we struggle. So I'd like to invite those who are our monitors to set up our stations for foot washing. And as they begin their ritual, I invite you, as you are ready, to come forward, as I mentioned, as you might for communion, to be washed and to wash each other.